Hello Epic 7, and welcome to the Tree of Genesis Investigation Part 1 and Part 2. So they've added a new unique PvE event to Chapter 5 that is part RNG, part trial and error, and a large part reading. It was kind of enjoyable. I liked figuring out the different combination of moves to accomplish the goals, but it can get a little bit frustrating, and many of you may not enjoy this kind of thing, so I've put this guide together to show you a step-by-step process on how to clear this content. Literally just follow along and click the buttons as I click them. I'll explain what we're doing and why we're doing it as we move along, and some RNG may make it fail, but try it a couple of times, you'll eventually clear all this content. Now, the first trial that we come across, we're fighting these Scarecrows. Now first we'll talk about the most important skill. After being attacked when his health is less than 50%, he activates Illusion, which reduces his combat readiness so he doesn't take turns, and summons 5 phantom Scarecrows. You can't target him while he's untargetable, go figure, and the only way to target him is to kill the other 5 Scarecrows, then you can target him again. This skill is such a pain in the butt that we're going to do our best to bypass that phase entirely. Hidden Secret. Like all Tree of Life bosses, if you soul burn a skill, you apply weakness, which lets you do incredible amounts of damage. So that's important for bursting it down in that 15 turn window. And the number one skill is at the start of the turn, he gives himself counterattack. So we need to make sure we use non-attack skills or find ways to strip the counterattack buffs, because this is a common theme in almost all the Tree of Life bosses. The other skills just say things like he attacks the enemy or penetrates defense, so not that important. So we are first. No counterattack buff yet, so we may as well just use our S1, get some damage on the board. Now we've got the counterattack buff, so we use the Scorpion's S2 skill here. It looks like an attack skill, but it's actually a non-attack skill, so we won't eat a counterattack, and we get a poison on the board. Likewise, we can use the Mushroom's S2 skill. It's a non-attack skill, gives a barrier to our Scorpion. Now we're ready to do some damage. We can use the S3 skill to apply more poisons. There we go. And the Mushroom can attack, so we can do an S1 for some damage. Counterattack buff is back, but also is our S2. Non-attack skill, so we put poisons on with the S2, and we use the S2 skill on the Mushroom once again, so we don't proc any counterattacks, gives us a barrier. Now we're ready to soul burn. We'll detonate those poisons with a soul burn, and we will get the weakness buff because we soul burned a skill. There's the weakness buff, and there's the poison pop. And he's almost dead. In fact, we can just have the Mushroom explode itself with its S3, and it should take him out, and we never had to deal with him summoning those darn Scarecrows. So there you go. Real easy, clean walkthrough for this phase. So now we move on to phase 2, where we fight a silver-maned Volf. I'm not sure what a Volf is, but here we go. So the Volf skills is when an ally is defeated, he gets enraged and grants an undispellable barrier for 4 turns, so we want to try to avoid that. Once again, you soul burn a skill, you get weakness, you do tremendous amounts of damage. This enemy spams evasion. Roar of Rage gives him evasion, and when he starts the fight, he starts with evasion. So we need to be able to strip the evasion and keep it from coming back. Luckily, we have sources of strip and buff block on our team. He also has a companion, and the biggest issue with the companion is he gives himself escort, and that's going to make it harder to kill the boss, and we're on the clock to kill this thing in 15 turns, so we'll eventually need to strip that as well. Here's how the team works. At the start of the fight, he gives himself evasion. Now, luckily we have a Ferris, and the Ferris's S2 skill strips the evasion and applies buff block so he can't get it back. Now we're in a good position to just go ahead and S3 and put poisons and heal block on everything. The Ferris can go ahead and S1, and the Ferris will get a second attack as well. And now we can use the non-attack skill to put more poisons on the main Volf. Now the Ferris has his strip skill back. We're going to go ahead and strip the front Wulf, get rid of that escort, That way we can start doing some real damage, and now we're ready to soul burn our S1. The soul burn of the S1 will give us the weakness buff, pop those poisons, do a tremendous amount of damage. We double tap with our Ferris, and we're done. You could use an S1 here, but I'm going to use an S3 just because I haven't gotten a chance to use the skill yet. Super simple phase, guys. Now we move on to part 3, the Shadow Strategist. Let's take a look at the skills. At the start of somebody's turn, when his health is 50% or less, he decreases his skill cooldowns and takes a turn. It can only be activated once per battle. Again, if you soul burn, you get the weakness. He gives himself greater attack buff with the Unleash technique, so he hits pretty hard. He can CR push up the enemies, and at the end of the turn, he grants stealth to the caster, so we need to have ways to get rid of that stealth as well, or stop it from proccing. He's got a friend who will trigger a dual attack with the highest attack ally, so that can be a problem when Gab is up, and penetrates defense, just basically hits you harder, and then dual attacks hit you even harder. We've got a Ferris and a Gargoyle this time. Same Ferris skills, so we can use that buff block to stop things from happening, which is what we do. We're going to go ahead and use the buff block skill, and we'll just S1 for some damage. The restrict is also nice. Now the Ferris can S3. This will give us an AoE attack, get some more damage on the board. And now more importantly, the Gargoyle can S3, and this will provoke. That will keep him from using any of his skills, and now we have enough souls to soul burn. So we soul burn the S2 to reapply the buff block. We're preventing him from getting any of his nasty talents. And now we just S1 him to death. That's really it. We got the weakness, so we're going to start hitting like a truck, so let's just burst him down with S1s. There's one hit, the double hit from the Ferris. We can S1 with the Gargoyle. We can S1 again with the Ferris into the weakness. And we can S1 again. And we S1 again. That easy. Oh, he survived. You don't get a crit there, he lived. If you get a crit there, he dies. A lot of the times when you fail in these fights is because you had bad RNG on whether or not you crit. Okay, let's talk about the mysterious metallic troll. So, the mysterious metallic troll, at 70%, he gives himself a undispellable barrier for 5 turns. It can only be activated once per battle, and it can't be dispelled. So we need to burst through that 70% threshold. Again, if you soul burn a skill, you get weakness to do tremendous damage. Other than that, he inflicts buff block on you, no big deal. He can stun you, which is some RNG. If you get stunned, you might have to restart the fight. And after being attacked, when he has a debuff, it activates Outburst. He also has a Lush Gaze, so this little eyeball brick just does damage and buffs him up. This is a pretty low RNG fight. Here's how the fight progresses. So at the start, let's go ahead and get him to that 70% threshold as soon as possible and try to get through the barrier phase. So we're going to kamikaze our mushroom to do a lot of damage. Now this attack has to crit. If this attack doesn't crit, you won't proc the barrier, you'll need to start over. Now we just want to S1 with the mushroom, trying to chip down the barrier here. We'll go ahead and S3 to get provoke up. And we'll S1 again, and we'll S1 again. This should get rid of the barrier. Not quite, but importantly it gave us enough souls that we can soul burn. So now we can soul burn the S3 on the mushroom. This will give us the weakness and do a lot of damage because of the soul burn. And just like the prior battle, now we just S1 until we win. We've got the weakness, so it's just a matter of damage bursting them down. Man, that mushroom hits hard. You could have also used the S3 here as well. Either one would have killed, and you're out of this phase. I think the only real fail to this is not critting with the gargoyle and proccing the barrier and throwing your whole rotation off. And that's it. That is the entire Tree of Genesis Stage 1. We'll grab our gold transmit stones, and we will explore all the way to Chapter 4 so that we can unlock the Tree of Genesis Investigation Level 2. I already did that, by the way. So over we go to the Tree of Genesis Level 2. Now we start on the second section of the Tree of Genesis. Our first fight is against an Obsidian Dragon. The Obsidian Dragon's S3 skill is that when his health is below 50%, after he's attacked, it increases the combat readiness of all allies and heals them, so we want to try to avoid that. Once again, when you soul burn a skill, it applies weakness for tremendous damage, and the dragon attacks you and does damage. He attacks you and CR pushes his allies, and at the start of the turn, after he suffers an attack, it'll recover health of all allies by 10%. He also has a buddy with him, a young Obsidian Dragon, and this guy attacks you, and he attacks you, and he attacks you some more. He also grants a defense buff to the Obsidian Dragon, but that's okay because we're predominantly going to use poisons, and poisons don't care about defense buffs. Poisons are true damage. So this is how the fight goes. Really, you should attack one of the two small dragons here. I attacked the main dragon. It worked out for me, but you really want to weaken the back row dragons because we eventually want to use our mushroom to AoE and take them out. And if the back row dragons don't die, you aren't going to be able to complete this. You'll just have to start over. So I do have the gargoyle attack one of the back row dragons with an S1, do some damage. Again, I should have attacked a back row dragon. You want to attack them both equally because the important thing is that when the mushroom detonates, it takes them both out. Now I've weakened that top back row one pretty good. I'm going to S3 the Obsidian Dragon to provoke it so it can't use any skills that would heal the back row dragons. He's provoked now. We'll go ahead and use the Scorpion's S3 skill. We'll get some poisons and do some damage to all of the enemies. There we go. Now this wasn't the cleanest run. Really, I should have done more damage to the back row, but because of that AoE counterattack, when I soul burn my mushroom here, I'll soul burn for the weakness buff so I can do more damage, but mostly it's to kill these back row dragons. If you soul burn this and you nuke those back row dragons and you don't kill them both, you'll need to restart. Now I crit on all those hits, so it killed them both easily, so we're able to progress, and now we can just whip out some damage and take the dragon down. So I S1, I drop another S1, I'll go ahead and S2 for the poisons that I can pop later, and I could S1 here, but I'm just going to S3. In fact, I'm going to soul burn it to increase damage, and that'll probably kill it. You don't need to soul burn here because if you don't kill it, you've still got another attack after it. But soul burning it and the poison pop took it out, clean and easy. I think your only RNG on this is not killing those back row dragons, not critting with your mushroom detonation and not doing enough damage to them. And now we move on to phase number 2, where we are fighting an Adamant Tarask. The Adamant Tarask skill that's a problem is if somebody dies, your team or his, it grants skill nullifier to the caster. Weakness is also in play when you soul burn your skill, but about that skill nullifier, we're on the clock to kill this thing in 25 turns. We can't afford to let somebody die, give them the skill null for 2 turns. It's the reason that I had to do this twice. There is a little bit of stun RNG, but not a huge deal, and he adopts a counterattack buff and gives Boiling Rage to one of his allies, and you need to hit the Boiling Rage unit twice to get rid of that buff. He's running around with some sharp Tarasks that will hit you and do damage, and they'll also hit you and do damage, and they have another skill that hits you and does damage, and also grants escort, makes it a little harder to burst the main boss down, but really it's not as big of a deal as you'd think. So let's jump in this fight and I'll show you how to complete it. This one does have some RNG to it, but you should be able to accomplish it pretty easily. So at the start, we just S1 the main Tarask for some damage. Everybody does their skills. Escort goes up and he gives himself the counterattack buff. We need to get rid of that counter buff, and we need to prevent him from getting more things, so we use the S2 skill, which is a strip, and replaces that counter buff with buff block. We can now use the S3 on our Scorpion, put poisons and heal block on everybody. Now we'll just do a few S1s. Do some damage, stall for time, build up some souls. Everybody's hitting my Scorpion. The S1 will hit twice, so that's some extra damage. The Scorpion can use the S2, we'll put more poisons on the Tarask. And most importantly, we get our souls ready to soul burn. So we're going to soul burn this skill to reapply buff block, but also to get weakness. So there's the buff lock, and there's the weakness skill. We get an extra turn because we soul burned, so since we attack twice, you pick whichever unit has rage on it and you attack it, and you'll double tap it and get rid of rage. If neither of them have rage, you'll need to restart. Something went wrong. Now we can go back to S1ing the main Tarask, and if they have, I'll use the Mushroom S1 here. Now, if the Tarask still has buff block, you can S1 here if the Tarask no longer has buff block, and especially if it has the counter buff back, you need to use the S2 to strip the counter buff. So pretty straightforward. If buff block's up, you can S1. If buff block is not up or counterattack buff is up, you S2 to strip that. We're going to S1, which does a tremendous amount of damage from the poison burst into the weakness debuff, and we just S1 for a double hit, and S3 would have killed as well. A little bit of RNG, but pretty straightforward. As you can see, I had to do it twice because I accidentally killed one of the mobs. He procced the barrier, and it stalled the fight long enough where even though I won, I didn't beat it in 25 turns. Now let's move on to fight number 3, where we are fighting the Dark Blood Revelation. So this Spanish Inquisition style fight has it so when he is at a 50% threshold on health, if he's attacked, he'll fully recover, so we've got to deal with that. Weakness, of course, lets you do tremendous damage from soul burning. He grants himself evasion, so he will need to be able to strip and buff block to prevent evasion from going up. Decreases buff durations, not a big deal. And more evasion. Evasion at the start of the battle, so we'll need to strip that at the start of the battle. He has a friend along with him who will put poison on you. That's great. He can inflict stun. And has Plague Shard. Now, Plague Shard's neat. When he's wearing Plague Shard and you attack him, it'll put poison on the main boss. So that is what helps us burst through this. We're going to poison cheese this guy to death. Now there is a little RNG in this fight, but it's a fast fight. The biggest RNG is right at the start. It's turn order. You need to make sure you have a favorable turn order. The order you need to go in is making sure your Ferris goes first, followed by the Gargoyle, followed by the Scorpion. And that's so that the Ferris can use his S2 and strip the evasion. And then the Gargoyle can S3 and provoke the mob that's got the Plague debuff. We'll go ahead and use the Scorpion's S3 to put poisons on everybody. And now the mob that's wearing the debuff, the Plague debuff, watch what happens when we S1 that mob. When you S1 it, it puts a poison on the boss. And since the Ferris hits twice, that's 2 poisons on the back row mob. Once again, we want to S1 that front mob, another poison on the back row mob. And once you've stacked enough poisons and it's your Scorpion's turn to go, soul burn the Scorpion's S1 skill. This will give us the weakness for enhanced damage, and we will detonate all of those poisons, and bam, the damage is huge. Now, although the boss would heal, since he's below 50%, we've got the heal block buff up, so we're in pretty good shape. And now we can just finish it off with a single S3 attack. If this attack doesn't hit hard enough to kill and the boss heals, start over. You got some bad RNG in there with a poison somehow. It's a very fast fight and a very clean fight. And now we move on to the final fight, the Beast of Anguish. Wow. Redheads, am I right? So skill 3 is the reading skill. Oh my god, this is a lot. There's so much packed into this skill. Let's get into it. So there's a threshold at 70% health that dispels all buffs and activates illusion. It stealths the boss, and you've got to do something to one of the crystals. We'll get into that in a minute to reveal the boss again. Then at 40% health is the big threshold. At 40% health, it activates block. Now, when illusion effect is granted to the caster, she's concealed and you can't see her, and it grants darkness to the gold klinode. You have to do things to the gold klinode we'll discuss in a minute to dispel the illusion. And at the 40% when it grants block, she gives herself mana shield, which means you can't do any damage to her, and she ignores all debuffs. Grants the light effect to the dark klinode, and you have to do things to the dark klinode to dispel the mana shield. Whew. Also, the weakness is in effect just like all the other fights. When you soul burn a skill, it will inflict weakness, and that helps us burst down some serious damage. She also attacks all enemies, ignoring debuffs, and she spams blind, which can be a problem. That just adds more RG. And at the end of the turn, she gives herself a counterattack stance, so we need to be able to strip that. Now let's jump over and talk about the gold klinode. The gold klinode can poison you and restrict you, not a huge deal. And when the caster is granted the light effect, to dispel the light effect, you attack the caster and it dispels mana shield from the boss. That's what gets rid of the damage null at the 40% threshold. So we use the light klinode at the 40% threshold to get past the 40% threshold mechanic that keeps us from doing damage. The dark klinode, again, poisons restricts you, and when the caster is granted darkness, the main boss is granted conceal, you attack the gold klinode, and this gets rid of the conceal effect so we can start hitting the boss. It's a lot, I know, and it's really not as bad as it seems. It's a bit of a pain in the butt, but once you get the swing of it, it took me half a dozen fights to get the swing of this. It was not easy. So we just waste some attacks on the crystals until we get to our Ferris. Our Ferris can S2 and get rid of the counterattack buff and apply buff block. We can then use our S3 skill to provoke the Beast of Anguish. We'll use our S2 skill to put some poisons on it. We'll just S1 a mob here. Now we can double tap the Beast of Anguish with our S1, do some damage. Now we're ready to soul burn. So we're going to soul burn our S1 just to get the weakness buff up. We can use our S3 to put poisons on everybody and combine with the weakness. That'll get us below the 70% threshold. Now, because what pushes us across the phase is the poison damage, it doesn't count as actual damage, so we actually skip the 70% threshold. We use the Ferris to skip the counterattack buff, and we can detonate our mushroom. This takes us below the 40% threshold, and now the Beast of Anguish has the mana shield. Now, we need to attack this light one. Watch, he's all the way back. We hit him. His CR pushes up 50%. After the Beast of Anguish takes a turn, when we hit him again, he'll push that other 50%, and that's what will cleanse the shield. So we just waste attacks into it. The Beast of Anguish takes a turn. I could attack it and CR push it up, but I'm worried that our gargoyle is going to die, so I use the S2 to put a barrier on our gargoyle. The counter attack counts as an attack. It pushes the Klinode up. The Klinode turns back into a dark Klinode, dispelling the mana shield from the Beast of Anguish, and we can start doing damage again. So we just hit it. We'll soul burn to get the weakness buff back up, debuff back up, so we can do some stupendous damage. I probably could S2 here, but it's on death's door now. We can just S1 and burst it down. So I'll S1 the Scorpion. We'll S1 the Mushroom. And an S3 would have been a fancy way to finish it off, but unfortunately I take the lame way out and just hit it with an S1 and kill it. And there you go. The entire difficulty of this fight lies in them expecting you to not read the novel of the skill and panicking when you hit one of the thresholds, especially when you don't see any way to remove the shield. But it really is just hitting the Klinode over and over again until it finally CR pushes itself up to change back and cleanse the shield, and there you go. I hope this video helps you out. I hope you enjoyed the watch. I will have step-by-step directions for each fight in the description of the video as a supplementary guide. If you have any questions, ask them in the comment section. Make sure you jump in our Discord and say hi to the community, and definitely make sure that you hit that like and subscribe button. Have a great one, everybody. See you next time.